Good afternoon, Petri, and thank you so much for joining us again on this Friday.
Good afternoon to you. Looking forward to the weekend.
Yeah, definitely. I think we all are definitely looking forward to the weekend. Petri, just a couple of minutes, I think about 50 minutes to go before the markets closes for the day and for the rest of the week. Let's get our market updates.
Alrighty, so market today, it's been a bit of a sideways week, really. Today, the top 40 index, interesting, yesterday when we spoke, it was up around 1/4%. By the time the market closed, it was down 1/4%. So I'm hoping that we don't see the same today. We are up around 0.2% at this stage, or 0.2% up. But again, a lot can happen in the last 50 minutes. We're hoping that we don't give up those gains. It seems as though the US is mostly strong at this stage, but I don't know. Much can happen in 1 hour. The US also had a fairly decent session last night, and as we know, the US market sort of leads the rest of the world. But in any case, okay, so let's get into it. The top 40 index, as said, up around 0.2%. Resource 20 index up around 1.2%. Industrial 25 index is practically unchanged on the day, slightly down, but very, very little. Financial 15 index is down around 1%, just under 1%. The JSE retailers index is positive by 1.25%. Retailers have been doing very well over this last week. They've really sort of been some of the outperformers. If we look at the rest of the world, looking at the UK, starting there as usual, the FTSE 100 index is up 0.2%, so they're beating us hands down today. Germany, the DAX market is up around 0.7%. French market up almost 0.9%. In the US, the S&P 500 currently up around 0.1%. Dow Jones Industrial Average marginally green to pretty much unchanged, I suppose you could say. The NASDAQ is up also 0.1%. And that Russell 2000 rebounding today by 0.75%. So that's good. When the small caps run, we know that the risk sentiment is positive. So we probably see a strong session closing in the US today. Risk on also means commodity prices down, unfortunately. Precious metals, gold price is down by around 0.7%, trading currently at $1,883.60 a fine ounce. Platinum, on the other hand, is up by just over 0.5%, trading at $1,151. Then energy prices, Brent crude oil is up 0.4%, currently at $72.81 as it trades in London. Its US counterpart, West Texas Intermediate crude oil, up 0.7% at $70.77 a barrel. Then in currencies, the Rand dollar exchange on the back foot again today. It's been a bit of a seesaw this week. I mean, I think we had a very strong week last week, and this week mostly consolidation. Been a relatively wide range. Currently, the Rand trading to the dollar at 13.67, which is 0.6% weaker. But we were trading here yesterday as well during some point. We did manage to close yesterday around the 50s, so we've given up a little bit of gains, but it's not, we haven't really weakened all that much during the last week. There's a lot of seesawing, but no real movement. In any case, versus the euro as well, the Rand is about 15 basis points weaker against the euro, so that's not too much at 16.56, and then 0.2% weaker versus the pound at 19.13, and then just once again against the dollar, we're trading at 13.68, which is around 0.75% weaker. And then cryptocurrencies, for those who are into Bitcoin, it's a little down, 1.25% down today, 37,367. Interesting how this instrument has been behaving. It's been consolidating around this level for the last couple of weeks now. So I'm quite curious to know. There's a lot of stuff. I think we're going to chat about it after this as well. There's a lot of big things that happen in the crypto world over the last week or so that I think is positive. We don't know how the story ends, but there definitely are some positive changes taking place. And I think that maybe the rest of the year, if my thesis holds, is going to be exciting.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about cryptocurrency, Petri, and of course the Basel Committee, quite an influential banking supervision group. Of course, having this proposal on cryptocurrency, and we've seen how cryptocurrency has really, picked up over the last few months and years. So just give us an idea, Petri, with regards to this decision that the Basel Committee is making and what the future lies for the cryptocurrency.
So, all right. So they put a recommendation out that deals with how much provision banks have to make if they want to hold cryptocurrencies on their balance sheets. Now that is a big move, right? Up to this point, cryptocurrency is, nerd internet money for people. And suddenly we see a number of things happening. One, El Salvador's president comes out and says, well, we're declaring this thing as legal tender, right? What that means is it now becomes actual real currency in that country. So this is something that wasn't, there's a number of things that something needs to be a currency. It needs to be a store of value. It needs to be a unit of account. And it needs to be a method of transacting or a transmission mechanism of sorts, right? So Bitcoin does, yeah, sure. I can buy stuff with it and people will accept it and exchange goods and services. So method of exchange, no problem. But the other two, store of value, its volatility is crazy. So it's not one of those. And a unit of account, nobody says I am worth 17 Bitcoin. They say I am worth $100 million, right? So they measure their wealth in some sort of a currency, whether that's rand or dollar or euros or whatever, right? Nobody measures their wealth in Bitcoin. Now we see El Salvador move and say, look, we see this as a real currency now. It is legal tender. You can exchange it for, goods and services, which also opens the door for they can be taxed on it. They can, all sorts of stuff. If it's normal money, it gets treated like normal money. The tax laws apply, etc. Right? So that's a very, very good move. But it still doesn't meet the sort of minimum criteria of what it is to be a currency. So store of value, because the volatility is crazy. There's a lot of arguments to be made that over time, volatility will reduce. But literally over like 100 years, right? It's a very, very long process. But now what we're starting to see is that, the banking sort of commission, and as you mentioned, they're very, very influential, have now made a recommendation to say, look, if a bank wants to take the stuff onto their balance sheet, we've seen companies start doing this. Some of the tech companies, MicroStrategy, for example, did a huge sort of a bond issue in the last week where they raised money from the market with the purpose of buying Bitcoin with it, right? We've seen Tesla put it on their balance sheet. We've seen a couple of sort of, some of these crazier out there tech CEOs take the stuff onto their balance sheet, right? And this creates a lot of noise and whatever. Now we've got this banking commission saying, well, look, if you want to put this on your balance sheet, here are guidelines to do it. So generally, for example, what a bank would have on its balance sheet is the home that the home loan is against, or the cash deposits that clients have with them. And for that, they have to keep a certain percentage reserve in order to safeguard the people whose assets they are, taken care of or is sitting on their balance sheet. So what this regulation or what this proposal does is it sort of sets guidelines for if a bank were to put it on their balance sheet, this is how they would go about doing it. And this is how much sort of margin for error they need. So you need 1,250% cover, which is, a lot more than you'd need cover on someone's cash, for example. And for the reason is obviously, down to the volatility of the instrument. But beyond that, it makes it very difficult for banks then to hold it on their balance sheet because of this incredibly high requirement. However, what it does show is that larger and larger and larger institutions are starting to take cryptocurrency, in particular Bitcoin, seriously, and are starting to classify it as an asset, right? We also saw one of the world's biggest stockbrokers called Interactive Brokers. We deal with them at Arena. They're our prime broker for the offshore stuff. In the summer obviously the US summer, they plan to allow clients to be able to buy real cryptocurrency directly through their stockbroking accounts, right? So the world is starting to wake up to, well, this thing is actually an asset. It's a new type of asset, it's a digital asset. So it's not like gold. It's not like, property or equities or any sort of interest-bearing instrument. This is a whole new different type of asset. So like it would be art or, collectible cars. This is a digital asset. And that is kind of forcing the hand of regulators to go, well, how do we regulate this? How do we control it? How do we ensure that people's money doesn't get stolen? How do we monitor transactions across the border with this stuff? So all this regulatory sort of motion is starting to take place around how do we legitimize this thing that, some unknown internet nerd made up in 2008 because he was tired of how, central banking works, right? So it's a revolution in slow motion, if I'm honest with you. I think it takes 100 years for a monetary system to change, and this is the beginning of it. Whether or not Bitcoin is the one, I don't know. I mean, I don't think I'll be alive to see the outcome, but I do think that there's an exciting opportunity for investors and the public at large and institutions and the entire sort of ecosystem to look at this crazy thing and say, well, how do we classify it as an asset? And yes, I mean, I think I should put in a fair amount of warning. I'm in no way advocating that you should go out and buy all the Bitcoin you can. I think you have to think very, very strategically about how much of it you buy, when you buy it, when you sell it. For example, one of the strategies that I currently have is that I want to sell all my cryptocurrency in December of this year, simply because I've done a lot of research around a sort of a 4-year cycle that's based on supply and demand of mining, cryptocurrency mining and the blockchain rewards and that kind of stuff. So it gets a bit complex. But as time goes by, that volatility should start to decrease on this 4-year sort of cycle, right? So if you're a long-term investor and you want to take a small piece of it, it would be nice to be able to do that through a regulated entity instead of, having to trust some person that sent you a WhatsApp and said, send me, $500 and I'll send you some Bitcoin. Like, that's not it, because of the nature of the thing. It's not regulated. It opens the door to a lot of, untrustworthy people entering into the playing field, and people get scammed and all sorts of stuff. So the more regulators are starting to take this stuff seriously, the less likely that is to happen, and the more it's going to become like a stuff that you could go to your stockbroker for, right? And that I think is really exciting. I think that sort of lays a solid foundation for this thing to be considered something like a digital gold, or I wouldn't compare it to gold actually, but it's just sort of like a digital asset, right? You can do transactions with it. You can record information on it. I can do a transaction with you. We can record that transaction. We can exchange Bitcoin or some sort of a cryptocurrency on a blockchain. That transaction is done in public. It's in public forever. It's irreversible. And that, for example, would be a much faster way of selling a house than waiting for 3 months for the transfer to take place through the banks. So I think, in a nutshell, I'll stop monologuing. I'm sorry. I do that sometimes. But in a nutshell, I think it's exciting times. I think, I think that the next couple of years for this thing is going to be very interesting. And I think that maybe it creates a bit of frenzy for the second half of the year. And we see some crazy prices closer to the end of the year.
Yeah, interesting to see what's going to happen regulating it, and of course whether it will be legitimized by these institutions. PETRI Redinghuys, we say thank you so much for joining us for today, for this week, and we will see you on Monday for the beginning of the stock market week. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Thank you. Have a great weekend as well.
You are also PETRI Redinghuys, Herenia Capital Advisors Portfolio Manager. After the break, we will be discussing the European Championships that kicks off tonight. Stay tuned to the Daily Factor.